Welcome to the Coffee with the Doctors, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris.
And I'm Dr. Liesel.
Hey, and we shine a light on the powerful scholarship emerging from Michigan's practitioner scholars working in K-12 schools. Each episode, maybe except for this one, we sit down with educators, leaders, and researchers whose work is shaping classrooms, guiding policy, and transforming communities.
So, hey, let's grab our coffee, settle in, and join us as we elevate the voices, ideas, and innovations driving Michigan's educational future. So, Chris, what's on the agenda for this week? It's 7 a.m. on a Saturday.
Well, Liesel, I don't know that we have a guest this week, but as always, we have a lot of great stuff to talk about. And so let's go ahead and let that beautiful Coffee with the Doctors theme song, shout out to producer Gabe, let's let that music play, and then we'll talk more about it on the other side. All right, so Lisa, I think we've got a long list of guests that we could get on the pod because there are no shortage of scholar practitioners. But this week, I thought it might be just a good idea for us just to slow down a little bit. In our primers, we've just been throwing out really amazing articles and stuff like that. Um, and maybe it is worthwhile to sit down and just pause on one. But before we do that, how do you think the show's going so far?
Well, I have to say that I love it. We've taken something that we've enjoyed that's enriched our thinking, and we've expanded it to really hear from our colleagues. And boy, have our colleagues shown up. There's been lots of things that they've said that are still at the top of my mind. For example, Dr. Harvell, when he was talking about um, his work at Romulus High School, and he just dropped some amazing quotes. And when he said to my question around um, what would it look like if schools took the advice from
Mhm.
your research, and he
Yeah,
said they would be places where kids want to be instead of have to be,
that's
and they
good.
would be places where families wanted to be, and that families would trust schools. And I can't get that out of my brain.
Yeah, no, that was a fire quote that he lifted up. I'm also thinking about last week we had Miss Mary Beam, who I butchered her last name, even though it's just a single syllable. So much for that doctorate. Um,
Or the
she
letters training.
so she posited that one of the things that we can do to improve the whole of our school system was simply just focus on standardizing literacy practices in our pre-K classrooms. Do you know, Dr. Carlson, that following that week, I went and had a meeting with both of my GSRP teachers and just said, hey, friends, are we doing writing daily with our GSRP students? And of course, shout out to the great GSRP teachers at Geyer Park. So there's no shade to you. Um, but they definitely said one of the comments was that we do a lot of like letter recognition stuff and letter sound things. And I said, one of the best ways to teach that is through writing.
Mhm.
They're not wrong about the need for phonemic awareness, but we don't have to do that disembodied from writing. It's the same conversations that we're still having about vocabulary. Like, we don't have to do vocabulary separate from actual writing or reading. We can do it within and integrate it. So, That's us going all around the stuff. But this is Coffee with
No,
the
that
Doctor.
was powerful, and I think
Yeah.
it's not been unlike the findings we've had not just locally, not just in Michigan, but nationally around an area of growth for publicly funded preschool has been that piece around oral language is absolutely prioritized, but when we
Mm,
say that writing is talking on paper and we
yeah.
provide opportunities embedded in all areas of the preschool classroom, we model it as teachers, like it absolutely connects that. We know the role that writing has played for us. Think about us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you can really
Absolutely.
solidify your thinking when you write it down. So I think that was
Absolutely.
absolutely powerful. And I'm making the connection now too, Chris, because this is what we do in Coffee with the Doctors.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
sparking. But both of our guests talked about the powerful role of families and communities.
Yeah.
While their dissertation topics were different,
Mhm.
they came back to how important building the trusting relationships are with families, ensuring that families are transitioning from preschool into kindergarten. How do we support them? That children are very much embedded in that family unit, and why do we consider that so separate many times?
Yeah.
And that gets into some of, obviously aligned with our culturally responsive pedagogies, but I think about many times it's confusing for children and students because all of a sudden there's lots of deficit thinking around their families, and that does not help them engage in school or build those trusting relationships with families. So I love that both guests absolutely authentically highlighted that important role of families.
Well, and Liesel, speaking of those culturally responsive practices, one of the articles that we just happened to throw out in the primer to cue up Dr. Harvell was a report that was done by Ed Trust Midwest titled Hope and Hard Work Ahead, Building a Strong and Diverse Teacher Workforce for Michigan Students. Um, the article clearly highlights the importance of teachers of color and the unique roles that they play in unearthing some of the things that we just talked about, bridging some of those community and school gaps. And it talked about the key issues around retention and recruiting of those types of teachers. But we just kind of threw it out there to introduce Dr. Harvell, and I figured it'd be worthwhile. Actually, you figured it'd be worthwhile for us to maybe dig back into that, as I have done a little bit of research on that. And little known Black history fact. I was actually, I don't know if I can say this, I was actually one of the people who Dr. Harvell interviewed for his dissertation of practice. So I think it's maybe apropos for us to maybe dig in a little bit to some of those findings and maybe use that as a tool to maybe talk about more of the related research out there and maybe practices too, because I think that's what our pod is all about. There's a lot of information about what the scholarship says, but we approach this work as scholar practitioners,
Mhm.
making meaning and use of the research.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really important bridge. I mean, that is the center of our work, and so many times on our Coffee with the Doctors, the banter back and forth with us, we're figuring this out as we're going. We're saying, "Hey, we read that you educators of color are so, and leaders of color are so important to students of color and white students. And that disproportionality of actually how many schools have any representation of educators of color is not where we want it to be.
Yeah.
And, I think that we've had some really strong initiatives at the state level around grow your own programs. And that has been found to have had, some modest effects um, on recruiting and encouraging teachers of color to enter our Grow Your Own programs.
Yeah,
Um, we're still not seeing that they're graduating at the rates that we're hoping for. And I
yeah.
know that, we've discussed, and I think we're going to dig into like, why are we finding that is, and then what can we do about that so that we can get more to the place where, like Dr. Harvell said, like what would schools look like if, right, we had more representation of educators of color, leaders of color.
Well, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then after that, let's jump into what some of this research says.
Sounds good.
All right. So, Dr. Carlson, hey, because it's just us two, I think it's worthwhile for us to put in actual show breaks. Usually we would introduce the interviewee, but for this case, it's just us. It's literally just coffee with the two doctors. So
What
there
it's
will
been for the last 3 years.
boom.
Coffee with the
So
doctors.
there will be no bio here. Just some more conversation about the research on um, teachers of color and their impact, and maybe on the ways in which schools are what they're doing to keep them, what they're doing to lose them, and what can be done from here. Um, I think maybe I'll start off with just some a little bit of background knowledge. One of the things that I get asked about pretty often is why is there so much focus on teachers of color? Um, are they truly better for kids? And there is just a lot of different angles that you can jump into those conversations. One of the studies that I used was I think it was called the Tennessee Star Study. Wow. Where it studied elementary students over, I think, a broad swath of time. I want to say it was about 10 years, and saw that students who had access to racially matched teachers in their earliest years were able to have or there was a significant impact on their achievement outcomes for their career, for their school career, whether that be proficiency levels and or high school graduation rates. Um, there's other there's other ideas about collective efficacy and students' ability to, when they have access to racially matched teachers, self-confidence and things of that nature goes up. There's other data about discipline and teachers of color being able to minimize some of those disparities within discipline rates in those classrooms. From my own research and the actual stories told by teachers of color, there were conversations around the relationships and those greater connections being had with the families and the parents and attendance rates. And none of these things are kind of like one for one, as we know that a teacher who's not good is whether they're white or black, is just not a good teacher. Conversely, teachers who aren't racially matched to their students but are great. But there is a good amount of research to say that those good teachers of color really can have a meaningful impact on student outcomes, student confidence, student attendance, which are all proxies for educational health for students. So just the first premise, it's a worthwhile endeavor for schools and states and our country to really think deeply about.
I think so too. And I think, it gets at one of those core pieces that I know that both of us really valued the work of Michelle Adams. I'm just bringing in the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
containment
yeah.
because in that book, which Chris might talk about later,
Hey, hey.
um, she tells the story of segregation, housing segregation, schooling segregation in Detroit. But her underlying belief and premise is that an integrated, multicultural community school and learning environment is good for all kids.
Ooh, yeah, yeah,
And so like
yeah,
when we're coming from the
that's good.
belief and Dr. Harvell talked about this that having a leader of color
Yeah,
is barrier busting around stereotypes of
yeah,
Black
yeah.
men.
Yep.
And so important for both young Black men and all students to see a Black man as a leader.
Yeah,
And so I think that this is all for us part of the same story is that
yeah.
we need to be shifting and moving through less segregated experiences that aren't good for anyone
That's
to
good,
a
Liesel.
more integrated, supportive, culturally valuing space is good for all learners.
Well, and just to piggyback off that, what I did in my kind of little prologue was just give maybe what we might call old-fashioned neoliberal, uh, vanilla advocacy for teachers of color.
Yeah.
But there are some public good, and those are conversations that we have a hard time talking about in our current political landscape. That is to say that who do we believe ourselves to be as a country?
Yep.
Do we believe it a good for all that we have schools where there are only one color of teacher,
Mhm.
where there are only one color of student?
Mhm.
If we believe ourselves to be a country where Dr. King said we're not judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character, then you would hope that the schools reflect that reality. And we do have schools as spaces for just diversity of all sorts. Um, so I think that's a really good insertion into the conversation. That said, Lisa, when we talk about some of the barriers, because I think the research or the article that we brought up initially does highlight some barriers for this kind of vision. Um, I mean, I'm sure you threw Michelle Adams out there, and so we could talk about some of the history of segregation, integration, and then resegregation. But just practically speaking, what are some of the challenges in our systems? Maybe kind of pushing
Mhm.
these schools to or pushing out teachers of color. What are some of those things that we've ran into or that the research that you've run into has talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we still see very segregated communities. I
Yeah.
think that, we like to say, throw around terms like zip code destiny,
Mm,
right? But in Michigan, we still are very segregated in many
hmm
of our communities. And
hmm
so, thinking about, I want to throw out there that we've talked about families and communities and that educators of color are not just important for kids in schools. They are
Yeah,
important for communities themselves.
that's
And
good.
grow your own programs are important for community empowerment.
Yeah,
And something that we know about a downside, unintended consequence of desegregation was the loss of a lot of Black teachers.
yeah,
Those Black teachers weren't lost just from schools, they were
yeah,
lost from communities.
yeah,
We know the role traditionally that Black teachers have played in Black communities.
yeah,
And I know that you dug into that, right? And your
yeah,
white Black teachers matter, right? They matter for
yeah,
a lot of different reasons.
yeah,
And so we need to care about it as that public good, like you talked about, not just for teaching
yeah,
reading and writing and numeracy, but like how they are mentors, pillars of a community.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just to piggyback off of that, in my research, I kind of played with the um, crap. What is her? What is oh, Carla Shalaby
Yeah.
over in U of M, one of the things that she did a really good job that we literally just built off of, she just took the canary in the coal mine idea to signify that struggling students
Mhm.
are first kind of alerts to the kind of problems within the educational ecosystem. Um, and as such, they can help point you or alert you to some of the issues that are happening in your space. We
Mhm.
kind of did the same thing for teachers of color, that outside of the systemic segregation issues happening within communities, there are things that are happening within school buildings that can work to kind of really upend cultural belonging,
Mhm.
or there are things that work to upend diversity within your building. And your teachers of color may be the first alerts to the fact that that's taking place. And we posited that there is this concept that we call cultural taxation that happens where we disproportionately put on weights um, for Black teachers that really strain them instead of collectively school buildings, whether you be white or Black, taking on some of the work of creating cultures of belonging in schools. And so that's one of the challenges that we're finding in school buildings, limiting teachers of color retention and recruitment. And so those are things and areas to be explored. And the article kind of makes mention of this. It doesn't cite our findings at all, but I mean it makes mention of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was top of mind this week as I was the work that I do. One of the areas that is key is around talent management and about workforce development.
Mhm.
And as I was meeting yesterday afternoon with our Grow Your Own grants officer at the state of Michigan, talking about flexibilities, ways in which we can really support um, members of communities to become, right? We
Yeah,
love that word becoming, we use it a lot.
yeah,
But I think about what research has shown around if you really support
yeah,
members of the community, they're more likely to stay. They're already invested in the community. They understand the wealth, the cultural wealth of a community, right? They
yeah,
have so many different loose and tight kinship ties to all members of the community. And so, we need to have enough time and funds for, say, someone who's a paraprofessional who has worked at a school for years to really be supported along their journey. We have been grateful to have a grant that was really a no cost pathway, would really support a teacher, not just in coursework, but any other types of expenses they would have. But some of the challenges are it's just not enough time. These grant
yeah,
cycles are too short,
yeah.
right? And
Well,
so it
yeah,
leaves people partially finished, right? And that's not helpful.
yeah,
And so I think about like there have been some concerted efforts, both I would say institutionally, right, at different layers. We have grow your own programs even in school districts, right,
yeah,
or in
yeah,
schools that are intended for aspiring teachers, aspiring leaders.
yeah,
Um, I think about how do we apply some of our learnings here to how do we make those things better? What other kinds of supports? And I think that Dr. Harvell dug into them a little bit. You certainly unearthed some of those that a singular teacher, for example, is not going to have the same success as if you provided, say, a cohort opportunity, right?
yeah,
We can
yeah.
provide each other support. So, what did some of your interviewees say about things like that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and before I go there, I do want to say this because it's interesting you mentioned the Grow Your Own programs. Um, One of the resources I leaned on for our research was the work of Dr. Dorinda Carter Andrews, who was one of the chairs on our dissertation committee. and she has this brilliant article called "The Gaslighting of Black Teachers,"
Mhm.
and which essentially makes the point that you made earlier that we don't get to a place where there's not a lot of black teachers in the field ex nihilo or out of nowhere. That
Mhm.
was a created condition, a function of integration that disproportionately targeted black schools for closing.
Mhm.
That's where black administrators and black teachers went. I think there is a second gaslighting, though, that has taken place. This is not an article, but it's just what I've seen.
Yeah.
And actually, the article that we're referencing points it out. And that is that in urban schools currently, there are these masses of alt-certed
Yeah.
teachers, and particularly black teachers.
Mhm.
And so the effect, and I'm sure you've seen this too, just in your work,
Mhm.
that the most needy schools have the higher proportions of least trained teachers. And so you can find yourself in a situation where you actually don't have tons of racial mismatch, but you have a lot of certification mismatch. So then the
Yes.
black teachers find themselves in situations where they don't actually have the appropriate mentorship. They don't have
Mhm.
appropriate onboarding. And build practices that are subpar to service their students as far as instructionally. They may have kind of the cultural cachet to speak the language of students. However, they begin to amass practices that are less efficacious for the supporting of students. And then you wonder why we do in Epic release a study talking about how black teachers are disproportionately rated lower than their white peers. And so, as we think about those grow your own programs, that's first to mind to me. Just thinking about how do we make ecosystems where we can grow our own, but put them in positions to thrive.
Mhm.
Um, because it can truly become, I can think about critiques for people who would advocate um, for more teachers of color, and I could see them saying, "Well, we made these grow your own programs to get more teachers of color, and they weren't any better." But they're not paying attention to the facts that I mean, because even if you are a teacher of color and you're going to grow your own program in a non urban community, the system still demands that we provide that teacher with the requisite training because so many of these grow your own programs are virtual. They're not the same type of quality. This is coffee with the doctor, so I think I can say that without throwing shade at anybody. They're not the same quality of program. So something to think about.
No, and I think that you bring up a really essential point around, you know, yes, we want to ensure that we have certified teachers, but a certification is never the destination, right? So it's really a license to learn, and it's necessary but not sufficient to build a teacher's craftsmanship. And so
Absolutely.
a lot of times that then is the baton is handed to the district in which a teacher teaches in, and a lot of that professional learning and continue to support and mentorship happens there, or with
Yeah,
support of outside professional learning providers, or ISD, RESAs, state of Michigan, things like that. However, there's lots of opportunities for different
that's
experiences
right.
and equity gaps there. So
Yeah.
even once you are certified, the
Yeah.
continued support of someone
Boom.
becoming
Boom.
a practitioner
Yeah.
of high quality,
Yeah.
right, is dependent upon a lot of factors.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so, I think that it is the layers of complexity are many.
Yeah.
Um, but some key takeaways are like, ensuring that we are intentional.
Yeah,
about like the why behind this. We all need to understand it, and the
absolutely.
how we can get there, and the how we can continue to support it is so key.
Yeah. Well, and I think now is as good as time as any just to kind of talk about some of the good practices that we've seen
Yeah.
and ways to address this. And one of the big authors I want to shout out is Rita Coley,
Hmm.
who really points at the power of affinity groups. Myself having the opportunity through organizations like Teach for America, and I know Teach for America gets a lot of flack, understandably. Um, but teach when I first joined Teach for America, and mind you, I actually graduated from a teacher preparation program, Fire Up Chips, woo, Central Michigan University. But when I did Teach for America, they had an organization called The Collective. I think this is back in 2014. The Collective was all teachers of color. It was an affinity group that they had created. And that was such a salve for the soul. We had book readings where I read Paulo Freire for the first time. I got to meet um, uh, Howard Fuller. Again, so a person whose politics I'm not necessarily in alignment with, but what I respect about him is that he's been working on the ground in education for decades.
Mhm.
Um, but I got access to that. And that was really important for me because I was in an all black student space,
Mhm.
um, while also being in a all white teacher space. And so
Mhm.
being able to be pulled out with other teachers of color was just a powerful thing for me. And so anytime I've had the opportunity to work in affinity groups, those have been so powerful for me. But outside of that, just having professional learning communities within schools to be able to commiserate with colleagues who are not necessarily the same race as me or
Mhm.
the students, but can still understand the work. I can bounce off questions with. Um, those are really or have been very powerful to just experience. Liesel, maybe at the state level, or what are some of the other tools that you've seen schools and districts use to help address these issues, especially retention and onboarding of teachers of colors.
For sure. And I think that you highlighted some really important both formal structures, right, for new teacher academies or mentorship programs.
Yeah,
I think it's always a both and. It needs to be intentional and structural.
yeah,
And yet we also need to create the conditions for the authentic, organic
yeah,
relationships to
yeah,
happen.
yeah. That's
You
good.
know, I think about how we sit here as coffee with the doctors.
Yeah,
Our identities are very different. We're of
yeah,
different generations, different
yeah,
races, different genders,
yeah,
but we had opportunities to
yeah.
collaborate together, both in our work environment and in higher education. And I think
Absolutely.
that when you find people who support you and
Yeah,
challenge you in all the right ways,
yeah.
we've got to really create the time, space, and support for that.
Love it. And before we get out of here, I do want to do the exercise for us. I want to go first because I think it's right on the heels of what you said. So this is a little bit different of a direction than we planned. But the last question that we asked, I think both of our interviewers were, what's a book that you are reading? And the
Yep.
book that I want to actually throw in there is a book that I think is worthwhile for this conversation. And it was given to us by none other than Dr. Christy Cooperstein. It's called Where Teachers Thrive. I
Hmm.
think that's such a seminal book because it's not racialized in its language, but I think some of the tools and the recommendations that it makes for how to support teachers are universal. That opportunity for collaboration, job embedded professional development, self-efficacy amongst teachers, those are the kinds of things. Do you have relationships as a person of color? Do you have a relationship in your building? Because your attendance as a teacher is impacted the same way as it is a student? Do you feel like you belong here?
Mhm.
If you do, you are going to show up in ways that are really going to impact the belongingness of your students. So that's a good book. It's not a book I'm reading currently, but it's just a good book to go ahead and check out. Dr. Carlson, what about you? What book would you throw into the mix?
I think it's so powerful that you said that because I think without adult culture, it's
Yeah,
tough to really support the
absolutely.
student culture of belonging
Yeah.
for sure. Shout out to my wonderful colleagues at Ypsilanti Community Schools, who
Whoop,
is
whoop.
working with the Zaretta Hammond on an amazing book
Oh,
study,
my.
Rebuilding Students' Learning Power.
My. Friends, if you guys want a
Awesome.
really good vocabulary word, cognitive redlining. That's an episode for later.
Cognitive redlining. I think she names it, and she really helps us to dig into, not unlike some of the other frameworks and scholars that we lean into, but what does it truly look like to shift from either the sentimentalist or the authority into a warm demander, right?
Mm,
Relationships and belonging are key, but in the service of really supporting students to be thinkers and learners. As we know and we talk about all the time, like this space that we are in and supporting students to become
mm,
learners, readers, writers, achievers, mathematicians, like this is the social justice work.
absolutely.
And so let's not leave it as we just need to have positive relationships. It's in the service of what schools aim to do, and that is to build students as scholars.
My. Well, friends, you heard it first. This is episode 3 now. So thank you for joining us on Coffee with the Doctors. So I think we did a pretty good job without a guest.
Yeah, this was
Um,
kind of like, I would say, old school coffee with the doctors. This
I,
is just what it looks like.
and so, hey, I do want to say this too, guys, thank you so much for just bearing with us as we get this plane off the ground. I was looking at our other episode. One of them is just like one picture and it's switching. The last episode was 3 people, but then we noticed music. This is a Pop the Trunk production. So just bear with us because I'm gonna tell you, by the time we get to episode 100, the day ones are going to see. We got proof of concept. By
That's
that
right.
point in time, we should have some merch and an actual mug for purchase and maybe a Patreon. But yeah, we're gonna start to get some processes down a little bit tighter. We're gonna go with the same tried and true backgrounds.
This is
Maybe
real, authentic coffee with the
coffee with the
doctors.
doctors.
7
Absolutely.
a.m. Saturday, same place, same channel.
That's right. So thank you for joining us at Where Practitioner Scholars, where Practitioner Scholars help us rethink what education can be. We'll see you next time for another conversation at the intersection of research, leadership, and practice. That's it for us, folks. We'll see you next week.